The X Series redefines what's possible with a compact pedalboard. Available in 14, 20, and 26-inch deck widths, our X14 and X20 models both fit within the most common international carry-on dimensions, making them extremely portable, yet expand on stage to a full-featured, ultra-capable rig. In this video, we'll cover some of these new features and share some tips on how to make these boards work best for you. Here's a complete build on an X Series X20. The most obvious feature of the X Series is how it expands when it's time to play and shrinks down for easy transport or storage. When closed, the two levels stack over each other completely, giving you twice the storage of a similarly sized flatboard. When it's time to play, just unlock the rear bolts and push the upper deck back into position. This reveals the lower front row, which is the perfect spot for your loop switcher or MIDI controller. Plug in your power and signal cables and you're ready to play. When it's time to pack up, unplug your cables, pull the upper deck forward, and slide the rear bolts into the sidewalls to keep everything locked in place. When you're switching between the closed position and the playing position, you'll want to push straight back or pull straight forward, like a drawer. No upward force is needed. Let the pedalboard do the lifting for you. Once you've moved it past the halfway point, a loaded board will want to fall back into its final position, so just keep some tension pulled straight back towards you as it lowers. After moving it a few times, it becomes pretty familiar. When you're in the playing position and you need access to the area underneath, put your palms up, your thumbs down on the pivot arms, and flick up with your fingers to disengage the latches. The deck is designed to settle naturally in a vertical position, so you can have easy access to your hidden pedals, power supplies, and cable routing. In this build, we've used compact power supplies mounted to the underside of the deck and back wall to make the most of the available space, while also running MIDI, USB, and tons of other functionality. Power comes into the board through the included IEC cable, which is cleverly concealed when the board is packed up, keeping it clean and dry. The free end of the cable can be supplied as a straight or 90-degree type to best suit your power supply unit, and can be mounted to the left or right side of the board. The opposite side can be fitted with our optional aux-DC cable, which is designed to pass power from your power supply to any external pedals like wahs or pedals in the audition loop. It uses a common 2.1 by 5.5mm DC socket and works with standard guitar pedal power cables, saving you the trouble of hooking up additional power sources. Just make sure your power supply is providing the right voltage, current, and polarity for whatever you plug in. The back left and right corners of the board each have modular slots which are ready to house our optional IO6 junction box, which is a 6-channel, 1/4-inch TRS patch bay, complete with an auto rerouting insert loop, which you can use for a 4-cable setup, an external wah or volume pedal, or as an audition loop. Whenever it's not in use, the signal is automatically jumped back to the return, so you don't have to rearrange any cables inside the board. On this board, starting at the front, we've wired for a guitar input, then a front of amp or direct out send. We've used the insert loop here for a compact volume pedal, which gets stored below the deck with our optional stowaway straps. In the last two channels, there's an expression pedal input which can receive a signal from either the mini pedal or can be used with a separate expression pedal, which can also connect to our final channel and provide an additional switching signal. It's also easy to use the insert loop to add or audition new pedals, along with the nearby aux-DC plug to provide power. There's really endless possibilities with how you can set up the IO6 for your own use. Because of the orientation of the box, straight jacks are too tall to use here. We've used square plugs, but other narrow profile right angle jacks also work just fine. Also, notice that the jacks and cables are kept away from the side wall of the pedal board, since this area will be filled by a part of the back wall whenever you close up the board. The left or right modular slots can also have an aux3 expansion port installed for extra connectivity. Each panel can be fitted with up to 3 connectors, such as a reversible Type A to Type B USB port, locking 1/4-inch TRS, XLR male or female, 5-pin MIDI, PowerCon connectors, or 2.1 by 5.5mm DC, similar to our aux-DC cable. On this board, we have a locking TRS plug wired to the switcher's second output for direct send of an acoustic guitar through an onboard IR in the HX Stomp. Next, a USB power port provides external charging for a tablet or phone via the Chox DC7 power supply. And in the third spot is a USB Type B port that's connected to a simple USB hub, which allows us to plug in one cable from a laptop and connect to all of our programmable pedals at once and make any changes through their computer interface. Now that we've covered some of the innovations and options available in the X series, let's take a look at wiring up a new build. Since this is a new way of thinking about pedalboard design, we're going to quickly go through the process of setting one up. Now we're working with our larger X26 pedalboard. Start by planning for your loop switcher and power supplies, since they're usually the largest units on the board and have the biggest effect on cabling. Then start planning the rest of your pedal layout around them. Power supplies can be mounted down on the base or the underside of the upper deck, and there are pros and cons to each location. Most of the pedals, and therefore most of your power needs, will be up on the top deck, so it makes sense to have a power supply mounted as close to them as possible. This lets you use shorter DC cables, but you'll need to consider the space that the power supply will occupy when the board gets closed up. The base will need to be left mostly empty below larger power supplies, but compact power supplies can often still fit above standard pedals. By mounting your power supply on the base of the pedal board, you'll need longer cables to reach all of your pedals up above, but it makes it a bit easier to plan out the lower area of the board. In a minute, we'll look at how to best manage cables which are passing from the bottom of the board up to the top deck, and those same principles will apply to your DC power cables. With a board this size, you'll likely be using multiple power supplies or a modular power supply system. In that case, we'd highly recommend mounting to both areas to limit the number of cables passing between levels. For simplicity, we're just going to keep both of them on the base. Lastly, of course, you'll need to check that the included IEC cable reaches the power supply location you've chosen. You can always mount the cable to the other side of the pedal board as well. Now lay out the rest of your pedals. Be sure to leave an empty channel on the base about 1.5 to 2 inches wide for your main bundle of cables. With some careful planning, cable bundles can also be stacked vertically on top of one another to save space and then branch off in different directions. It's important to note at this time that cable routing needs to be restricted to the back section of the underside of the deck, because when the deck is drawn forward into the closed position, the front of the deck sits directly above the front row of the base, where your switcher, controller, and pedals require headroom for clearance. Now we'll choose a single place where the signal cable bundle will leave the lower level and head up to the upper deck. Up to 12 cables per bundle works comfortably using Mogami 2319 cable. We found that 4 to 5 inches from the back of the base is ideal for the lower anchor point. The left-right position will be determined by the layout of your pedals. Now we'll locate our anchor points on the underside of the upper deck. You'll want to anchor the cables 4.5 to 5 inches above the back wall as it lays flat. Our bundles will be anchored using the supplied adjustable cable straps. Having an adjustable strap at both anchor points is particularly useful as the bundles grow during the build and for making final tension adjustments once the main bundles are all in place. Use the larger straps at the main anchor points and the smaller straps as the bundles begin to branch out. In the X20 build, notice how we have one anchor pointed horizontally and one pointed vertically. This will affect how the cables sit when the deck swings down and the bundles slack up. Both directions work well depending on where your cables are traveling. Anchors should hold the bundle horizontally if your cables will be running across the board as they branch out, and vertically if lots of cables are going up to the top deck immediately. It helps to bundle up some of your bulk cable to visualize what direction it will settle into as it slacks up, based on the orientation of the anchor. The horizontal ones will move slightly to the side, so just make sure the bundle has some space to settle into when the board is closed. Once you're happy with the anchor points, mount a couple large cable straps. Next, we'll plan out the rest of the cable distribution on the underside of the deck. The cables from all of your front row pedals will pass through the middle loops in the deck as they make their way towards your anchor point. Cables from the back row pedals can pass through the middle loops as well as the top channel, which is useful if you have lots of top jack pedals. You'll likely end up with a run of cables somewhere below the middle loops and perhaps another just above the back channel. With that in mind, place some smaller cable straps, appropriately spaced, to collect your cables together as they gather towards your anchor point. Traditional cable tie mounts can also be added here for extra organization and support wherever needed. Okay, it's time to run some cable. We're only going to run a few cables on our sample board here to give you the idea. Our method is to start by bringing cable through from the location of the jack of each pedal. Run cable from your roll down through the deck loop, through the closed but not yet tightened cable straps, on through the main anchor points, and onto your switcher input or output for that pedal's loop. Don't cut your cable quite yet. First, attach your jack at the switcher end of the cable. Then work the cable back towards your starting point along the exact path you'd like it to be secured. For all cables, because this step is just a rough fit, We'll leave a little slack at the pedal end to trim to final length later. Label the cable at both ends to stay organized. Pedal name, loop number, and in or out on the pedal end of the cable, and pedal name, loop number, and send or return on the looper end. With the cable fully labeled and left a few inches long, make your cut. Repeat the process for the rest of your cables. Once all cables heading to the top deck are in place, tighten up the cable straps and any other cable ties, beginning at the switcher and working towards the upper deck. The slack in the bundle between the anchor points should be left loose enough so that when the deck is flipped up, there is a soft curve in the bundle, not so tight that there is tension on the anchor points and hard bends in the cable. Regular zip ties can be used to keep the bundle compact and tidy, but observe where it bends the most by lowering the deck, and avoid adding them in this area so the cables can fan out a little and move around each other easily. Once all cables are secured through the anchor points and other straps or ties, it's time to trim the pedal ends to their exact length and connect your jacks. We like to future-proof our setups by leaving enough length in the cable so that you can always reuse it if you swap out for a different pedal. Depending on the position of the pedal, this might mean folding over a small length of cable so that a side jack pedal can someday be swapped for a top jack pedal, or vice versa. For pedals on the lower deck, the same overall process applies, but without using the main anchor points. With all your jacks now attached and all cable routing in place, the last step is to reinforce the anchor points. For one strap at a time, undo the strap, drive the provided screw through the center hole on the base, being careful not to over-tighten the screw, and then retighten the strap. Repeat for the remaining anchors, and you're ready to go. That wraps up our overview of the features and setup tips for the Pivotal Pedalboards X series. We hope you found it useful. More information can be found at pivotalpedalboards.com.